Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning.
Nice to see you here. I just wanted to know a little bit about your what's happening with the anti-racism for the fight for the new secretariat. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about?
Sure. So across Ontario, we've seen a heightened situation where folks are being treated in ways that are completely inappropriate because of their culture, their race, their religion, and that's that seems to, that kind of thing seems to get worse as as the economy gets worse. I mean, people unfortunately. React in ways that are completely unacceptable. And so late in the year, last year, we started to put some pressure on the government to establish an anti-racism secretariat here in this province. There used to be an anti-racism secretariat back in the 90s, and then the government brought forward changes to our human rights system in Ontario, and in that change, about 8 years ago, they included the reestablishment of the anti-racism secretariat, but then they never bothered to actually establish the Anti-Racism Secretariat. So we've been putting pressure on for some time now, and finally, the government agreed very recently to set up an anti-racism directorate here in Ontario, and so we're pleased that that has happened. Although the next step, of course, is to make sure that it actually is up and running and doing important work around not only responding to situations that they have reported to them, but more importantly doing some of the proactive education and advertising and community-based work to kind of name, if you will, what's going on, because in the naming of it, you then have to take responsibility for it, and in taking responsibility, you then have to take action. And so, for me, now that they've said they're going to do something, it's going to be all about keeping an eye on whether or not, in fact, they do follow through and start tackling the scourge of racism in this province. And of course, it's certainly something that Thunder Bay and northern communities are facing in just unacceptable situations, both in terms of incident based, but also systemically. I mean, there's the systemic racism that continues to exist in all of our systems is unacceptable, and it's creating a very negative lived experience for so many people, and we can't tolerate that anymore.
The 94 recommendations for the TRC.
Mm-hmm.
What the call for action for them, especially for the murdered and missing women.
Mm.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, we feel very strongly that, particularly the recommendations, because that's my job as a provincial representative, that require provincial action, that we ensure that the government follow up. I was a little bit worried when some of the recommendations around curriculum and education were referred to by the Premier. That the sense that I got was that the obligation that they thought was theirs was to provide extra resource materials if they were requested by a teacher. Well, that's not what the recommendations say. I mean, it should be a complete overhaul of a curriculum that every student is exposed to, and that is taught in terms of the history of our Indigenous peoples in this country and in this province. And so for us, it's about being vigilant in terms of the follow through. I mean, the last thing and the most irresponsible thing that could happen would be that those recommendations gather dust on a shelf like so many other reports. So for the Truth and Reconciliation process to actually come to some closure, those recommendations actually have to be implemented. The other piece around murdered and missing Aboriginal women is, I mean, that's still an ongoing process, as you know. And one of the things that I'm interested in seeing is what comes of the next phase of the inquiry. I mean, it's kind of back to the drawing board, which I think is a good thing, because women and people said, the previous process wasn't good enough. It didn't do what it needed to do. And so I'm hopeful that the current process is one that actually is one that can be embraced because it's been driven by and guided by Indigenous peoples as opposed to the opposite way around.
Just to ensure, how can we ensure that the grassroots people are involved with the process?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of talk around how that's the kind of the desire of government, right? But I think the where the accountability comes in is if we see that desire not actually being realized in processes that are reaching out and pulling in opportunities for people to engage. And I think that's one of the biggest issues is that it's easy to talk about that. It's easy to talk about a process that's driven by and that's embraced by and directed by Indigenous peoples, but it takes a lot of commitment by government not to allow a process to kind of just swing back to the same old way of doing business, if you will, and so part of that is going to be diligence, really, by sisters and women and their supporters and others that are wanting to participate. The other piece is going to be making sure that when and if things fall off the rails, that there are other advocates that are working with Indigenous peoples and with women to make sure things get back on track, and that's something that New Democrats do very well, and we would be hoping that that our relationship would help us to help put things straight if they go off path.
Oh, Chimigwich, Andrea. I'm so glad to meet you again.
My pleasure.
It's been a while.
It has. Thank you.
Thank you.